Good afternoon. Today I would like to take you on a journey to a place that I believe we've all been to and experienced, but might not recognize or appreciate. Come with me and let's explore thin places. Now, when I say thin places, some of you might think, what does that mean? Or where is that located? And what type of exclusive club is available only for skinny people? Thin places are not just for the skinny, and definitely do not exclude people like myself or Mr. Richard Barnes. A thin place is described as a place in time where space between heaven and earth grows thin, and the sacred along with the secular transcend one another and meet. This term comes from the ancient Celtic culture, in which they believe that there are places where the veil between this world and the spiritual realm is diminished. Regardless of your faith or your religious views, I think we can all appreciate those places where we feel at peace with ourselves, feel close to nature, or even a oneness to something greater than ourselves. I would like to share with you a few thin places that are sacred to me and to my family. A few months ago, I got a wild hair on a Sunday afternoon to pack up our motorhome on a whim and drive from our home just outside of Salt Lake City up to the Idaho Falls area, just 4 hours north of us. I did not have to work the next morning, but had warned my coworkers that I might not be in on Monday. It just so happens that on that Monday, August 21st, at around 11:30 in the morning, the moon would pass directly between the earth and the sun, causing a total solar eclipse. I have never considered myself someone who would be considered an eclipse chaser, but I found myself and those that wanted to go with me excited with the anticipation of what we would experience. On Monday morning, we made it to the small town of Roberts, Idaho, located about 15 miles north of Idaho Falls. According to all the maps, this location was within a mile or two of the center line of totality. This line of totality is the line in which the darkness that is caused by the moon passing between the earth and the sun is considered to be its longest and most impressive. We found a great location off a gravel country road near a farm, in which a nice farmer let us park for a couple hours that morning. As you can see from the picture, we set up our chairs and started to look heavenward as the moon started to partially cover the sun. It was impressive. As we donned on our special eclipse glasses and stood looking at the spectacle, time seemed to stand still. What actually took an hour seemed to be like 4 as we stood awaiting the moment when the darkness would cover the area and a sunset would surround us from all sides. A couple of my children and my mother-in-law decided to climb up on top of the motorhome to get a better view from a few feet higher in elevation. It was a clear day, and in fact, we could see the peaks of the Tetons in the distance as we looked towards the east. We were lucky that day. There was no wind and not a cloud in the sky. It was almost like Mother Nature was telling us, wait patiently and look what I can do. As we stood watching the partial eclipse move from 90% to 95% and then to 99%, you could feel the anticipation and the nervousness of what was about to take place. As the last glimmer of light peeked past the moon, you could hear those in our group yell out, "Diamond ring." Then it happened. The air grew cold and the twilight swept over us from west to east. The sun appeared to be setting all around us. We took off the special glasses and we looked heavenward to an indescribable spectacle like I've never seen before. The darkness of the moon covering the brightness of the sun created a white ring with long flowing wisps that seemed to be moving. With the beauty of the moment, you could hear the yells of amazement and the cheers. I even saw some tears of joy being shed by some as we stood in awe at that place at that moment. The view only lasted a little over 2 minutes. The light soon returned and the brightness of the sun overshadowed the darkness that had preceded. That place, at that moment, truly seemed worthy for me as a thin place. It truly connected. I truly felt connected to something bigger than myself. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't believe that you have to drive to the next total eclipse in the United States on April 8th, 2024 to experience a thin place, although I would highly suggest it. Thin places can occur for us at even places that you might not think can transcend us and touch us. For example, earlier this year, I took my family to Walt Disney World, the happiest place on earth, right? Home of long lines, expensive food, and whiny children. Doesn't make for a thin place. In fact, it might be considered the opposite. But our experience was unique at Epcot one evening. As the nightly show illuminations ended and the park closed, we found ourselves slowly making our way back from the far end of the park over to the monorail to take back to our hotel. I can't remember what stalled us from staying with the herd. Maybe it was bathroom breaks or just our pace from a long and exhausting day. As we walked through the different country areas, Italy and France, we discovered that we were all alone. No one was around us. This was unusual because just 30 minutes prior, there were tens of thousands of people gathered together to enjoy the show. The kids were talking about the day and skipping along. I was holding my wife's hand. On my left and on my right was one of our twin daughters, Clara. I looked over at her and smiled and remarked on the peaceful feeling and the true joy that we were feeling as a family at that place and at that moment. It was truly magical and exactly the way Walt Disney had envisioned it, right? We felt connected. It was well worth our time, effort, and energy that went into that trip just for that one moment at a thin place called Epcot. Now, I can think of another thin place that we enjoy as a family that isn't 2,000 miles away from home. In fact, it's only about 15 minutes from our house and can be viewed daily from our back deck. We live in a little valley that is bordered on the west by a mountain range that towers to an elevation of over 10,500 feet. Our town is situated at an elevation of 4,400 feet. That is quite an impressive ascent in just a few miles. On the road that leads to the trail to what is known as Deseret Peak, there is a small campground that is located on the opposite side of the road, which is divided by a small creek. To get to the area, you need to cross over a bridge, and that is where this picture of my family was taken just a couple of months ago. Yes, this is a pretty large selfie. That makes 9 of us, including myself and my wife. This area is special to me and my wife and is considered a thin place. We have been making a pilgrimage to this spot for over 20 years. It is our tradition that on the first Sunday of the month of October that we make the short trek up into the mountains to enjoy the leaves changing color and the crisp air that is associated with a fall afternoon. What a great tradition, a special moment, and a sacred thin place that will not soon be forgotten by any of us. Sometimes thin places and the moments that are associated with them are when we are all alone and are not with others, and can be only be shared by the feelings that are stirred up within inside of us, along with the appreciation and the experience that is solely ours. This happened to me over 20 years ago, as I awoke early one morning before the sun came up on a small island in the South Pacific near Tahiti. Back then I was a service missionary and had to decide as a young man that giving of my time unselfishly to others for a couple of years would do me some good as I transitioned into adulthood. For some reason, on this particular morning, I awoke when it was clearly dark and the light of day had not pierced that side of the hemisphere. I was drawn out of my small house to the beach that faced the lagoon. It was only about 20 feet from the door, and I sat there and looked towards the east as I thought of my loved ones that were thousands of miles away. It was peaceful and tranquil. I don't remember why, but I took my cheap Kodak camera that I had purchased before I left America and had it ready to capture the sunrise as it descended upon that part of the world. As the light started to penetrate the darkness, to my amazement, I saw one of the most amazing, awe-inspiring vistas in my life. As you can see from the picture, from the few seconds that this site was available, I was actually able to capture the moment to share with you today. Yes, I took that picture. To prove it, I have a picture of the same view from just a few minutes later. This truly made me appreciate that spot and what I experienced, and made me feel special to have witnessed such a marvelous and almost life-changing moment. That place is very thin for me, and it's sacred to who I am. Finally, I would like to share with you a thin place for me and my wife that didn't necessarily come from a trip or a tradition or a unique natural experience. This place came to us through adversity and at a very tough and scary time for us. This picture is of a tulip field taken just an hour north of Seattle in the town of Mount Vernon. Now, Mount Vernon is known as the tulip capital of the world. And with flowers being one of my wife's passions, this has always been on her bucket list to visit. Even though we got to visit this spot, it didn't exactly come about like we had planned it. It was early in the spring of 2013, and we were expecting one of our 7 beautiful children. In fact, to our surprise, we were not only expecting 1, but 2. Yes, the doctors let us know that after 5 children, we were having identical twin girls. With the stress of new little ones joining us in the coming months, the thought of our expanding family had settled in, and we had embraced the thought of lucky 7 being our number. During the initial visit to the doctor, he had encouraged us to visit a specialist at a different hospital the following week. They had some advanced ultrasound equipment there that would dive deeper into the health of the twins. We attended without any preconceived notions of there being any issues or problems. During our follow-up visit with the specialist, they found that the babies were not in good health and that they had a condition known as twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. This happens only in identical twins and causes damage to the heart of both babies due to the flow of blood from one to the other as they share the same placental wall and the nutrients required to grow inside the womb. In most cases, this can be fatal to both babies and even mother. They informed us that there was a procedure that could help fix the issue, but that they could not perform it. They encouraged us to visit one of the handful of hospitals in the U.S. that could perform the miracle surgery. The list that they gave us included a hospital just outside of Seattle called Evergreen Hospital. They got us the next available appointment the following Monday, and we booked the flights. We were off to save precious little lives that we didn't even know yet. While the process was extremely stressful and even scary, everything went well. After a couple of days of recovery and the blessings of the doctor, we were able to come home. But before we left the area, we had a few hours to spare and decided to visit the tulip farms of Mount Vernon. Yep, we checked that one off the bucket list. The feelings of relief as we slowly walked the area due to the surgery that my wife had just had, that place transformed into a thin place for us, never to be forgotten. Every person will identify a thin place differently. I can only share my own way. A thin place is sensed differently than our present world. You cannot see it, touch it, hear it, smell it, or taste it. Our sense of a thin place transcends the physical limitations of our 5 senses. I am sure that each one of you have felt stirred up in your minds during the last few minutes the places that you have been where you can certainly feel a transcendent presence that touches you and lets you know how small you are in this vast universe, but also gives you a feeling of importance to experience an extraordinary oneness. They say that we should carpe diem and that we should live in the moment. It is certainly hard in the hustle and bustle of our everyday lives to take time to seek out the extraordinary. We can truly get caught up in the matrix, so to speak, where we perform our tasks and our relationships with others like programmed robots. Let us all try to seek after thin places and enjoy the rejuvenating moments tied to those places, so we can look back when the stresses of life come up and refocus ourselves and our energy to that which matters most. For those of you in the town of Greensburg, Kansas, I can just imagine the thin places that you have here in your town. Hallowed ground where you have experienced something that many of us would never want to witness. I hope that as I experience your town, that this place too might become a thin place for me.